Since January this year, a copy of the Quran has been burned around 8 times in Sweden. There have been at least 5 burnings of the copies of the Quran in Denmark as well. To help us understand why this is happening and what the Muslim community can do in response, we are joined now by Brother Joram van Klaveren. He is a former Dutch politician who embraced Islam in 2018. He now runs an organization called Islam Experience, committed to explaining Islam to European non-Muslims. Assalamu alaikum, welcome to the show.
Alaikum salam. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you for joining us. I just mentioned the figures, 8 in Sweden and 5 at least in Denmark. And I'm wondering, is there something special about 2023 that these incidences are happening, or is it a common thing in Denmark and Sweden for Quran burning?
Well, it's not the first time. And it's not only in 2023. We have had burnings in Scandinavia, but also in the Netherlands, where I live, where people did that before. Some people were not only burning, but tearing the Quran apart, stamping on it, spitting on it, stuff like that. And it's just basically to get attention.
I was wondering about that. Like the first time you think, oh my gosh, what is this? But then there's time, and then the second time in the week, and then a week later and a week later, it is starting to feel like a publicity stunt. So can you explain like the groups behind this? Why do they use that as their publicity stunt?
Yeah, it is a publicity stunt, but at the same time, it's also like a political strategy. I was, of course, member of a party called the PVV, the Freedom Party. That's one of the biggest anti-Islam organizations in Europe and the biggest in the Netherlands. It's now the second party in the Netherlands, in the Dutch parliament as well. And you have parties like that in Sweden, in Denmark, in Belgium, in a lot of member states in the EU as well. But what you see is it's not that these parties are burning Qurans, stamping on it. It's something they don't care about anyway, and it serves them in their cause. But what you see is that's mostly like independent politicians, very extreme, more extreme than these parties, that do stuff like this. And why do they do that? Because they want to have like a profile of being very anti-immigrant, anti-Islam, being harsh on subjects like that. And to show the people they are tough, they do stuff like that because it gains attention from the media over and over again. And for the political organizations in parliament, it's a good thing, so to say, because it serves their cause. Because the narrative here is Muslims are very emotional, Muslims are irrational, Muslims cannot behave, Muslims are always aggressive, they're always screaming, fighting, killing, etc. And by burning a Quran, of course, you have a reaction. And most of the time people are being sad or angry, etc. And some people are starting to shout, scream, do stuff, act in the way that those parties hope they will act. So it's in a way, it's like a political trap almost.
I hope to come back to that later in the show. Like you just said, it's a trap, like a bait for Muslims. But if I just can focus a little bit more on why they're doing it and why it's the Quran. You mentioned it as a strategy. So is it to gain votes from people who also hate Muslims? Is that sort of like a vote-getting strategy?
No, it's because most of the people who already hate Islam, some of these people even say it's not necessary to do stuff like that. Because in a way, I think people know, because I've noticed people who still vote for these parties. I know, of course, old colleagues, people in my neighborhood, etc. And even those people say it's kind of strange to burn stuff, because you accuse other people of being violent, and at the same time you're the guy or girl who's being violent because you are burning things, in this case the Holy Quran. But it's just to get attention. So the so to say, the independent extreme right anti-Islam politicians, they have to build up their profile, so to say. So these people really need it. But at the same time, the bigger anti-Islam organizations who are, for example, in parliament, they support it silently because it serves their cause. Because most of the time, there are going to things will happen. You will see that, for example, Turkey is going to make a statement in publicly, European Union, in the United Nations. You have Pakistan, for example, and Palestine, of course. They objected these crazy burnings, of course. But here they translate it in a different way. They say, "Oh, this is how they treat our freedom of speech," and of course, it has nothing to do with freedom of speech anymore. But that is how they sell it. And so it's not so much that they want to gain extra votes. It's just to stabilize and show the people who are already voting for them, they're still there. They're still harsh. And even if people are trying to take away freedom of expression, freedom of opinion, etc., and we will still be there fighting for the cause of freedom.
Some of the people who've been doing the burnings are from Middle Eastern countries like Iran. I think they're either ex-Muslims or minority, like Christian Middle Easterners or something. I wonder if you have any insight on that. They have obviously a different motive then than the extreme far right people that you've just mentioned.
Yeah, well, in the far right, a lot of people don't know that. A lot of people who are in those parties are also ex-Muslims, very secular people. And of course, you have the far right native guys who are most of the time, of course, not Muslim. Then they were never Muslim. But you also see, for example, in Sweden, there was an asylum seeker, a Christian guy from Iraq, if I'm not mistaken. And he burned the Quran as well, or he tried to burn the Quran. And of course, these people obviously are very troubled. I think some of them are plain crazy because we've seen people like that acting in a crazy way, like trying to burn the Quran, stamp spit on it, or whatever. Some of those people were really mental patients. So it's a crazy dynamic going on here. But in the end, it really has to do with Islamophobia, and Islamophobia is not something that's only on the far right; it's also on the far left, and you also see it with people who, for example, were ex-Muslim. So it's a strange combination, and some parties here in this crazy context, they benefit from it. Media sells extra papers. The political parties in parliament, they say, "Hey, look at these angry Muslims. We told you so. You better vote for us. Otherwise, these guys are going to take over." And you have people who are, for example, crazy or have their own small little agenda. So all these parties have their own reasons and their own goals.
You mentioned expression, and I have a quote here from the Turkish President Erdogan, who said, quote, "The arrogant Western people should be taught that it is not freedom of expression to insult the sacred values of Muslims." And I'm wondering, you mentioned it's not freedom of expression. You know, book burning in Europe has a long and dark history, doesn't it? But it's usually always on the other side, like it was the people against freedom of expression doing the book burning. And now it's supposed to be people in favor of freedom of expression doing the book burning. I'm wondering if you could unpack that for us.
Yeah, no, it really is strange, of course, and it's something I've mentioned in a radio show here as well. Well, there's a famous writer here who once said, "Where books are being burned, in the end, people will be burned." And that is what it is, because the last time that people really were burning books here, it was during the Nazi regime of Germany in the 30s and 40s. And now the people who say they are in favor of freedom of expression are defending the burning of books. So it is, you're completely right. It's a very strange, crazy situation almost.
Take a short, and when we come back, we're going to talk about more about how to respond to the book burnings. We're talking with Brother Joram van Klaveren from the Netherlands about the Quran burnings in Sweden and Denmark and the wider situation in Europe. Now, in another interview I've seen you do, you were talking about the rise of secularism and atheism in Europe. And you said that because Europeans are getting less religious, it makes any religious people, Muslims included, seem strange to the secular Europeans. And I'm wondering if how do they understand the Quran burning? How does it sort of go into their minds?
Yeah. Well, I think it's important to say that almost 80% of the people, it was 79, if I'm not mistaken, of the people here in the Netherlands said they disliked the burning of the Quran. So most of the people, let's say 4/5 of all the people, still think it's a crazy, very bad thing to do. So let's be happy about that. But there is a growing minority now, like 20%, a little bit more, who is in favor of burning the Quran. And a lot of people here, they really do not understand the religious feelings of, in this case, the Muslims. Why? Because, like you said, like I said earlier, it's because of secularization. A lot of youngsters, especially, they don't uh, learn anything about religion, so they're not raised in a religious way. So they don't really have this religious feeling when you talk about Allah, God, when you talk about the Quran, for example, or the Bible in the case of Christians. They really don't have anything with those feelings, and they really don't understand how important it is for religious people. So that makes it very hard, because I've seen a lot of people here, and those were from very left-wing organizations. They were defending the burning of the Qurans as well, and they said, well, it's just a book with paper. That's it. When we burn, for example, a magazine or like a comic book, you wouldn't be acting like that. So why are you doing that? And those were very intellectual people, so they really don't get it. So then I'll try to explain what it is, but because they don't have this feeling, this part of being human, almost the religious part, and it's always been part. And you don't have to specifically be a Christian or Muslim, whatever, but the fact that you know that there is a creator, that there is a holy thing that is there in society, that is there in your personal life, it's just a lack. They don't know it, and that makes it very hard to explain. But I think it's a good thing, and a lot of people don't know it, not in the EU, and especially outside the EU, that it is not permissible to burn the Quran. And there's even been a case in the European Court, the European Court of Human Rights, in 2009. There was the case of ES. There was a politician from Austria, and she said a lot of horrible things about Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him. And Austria, the country, said you cannot say that, and she was fined. So, and she was very angry, and she said, "Well, I'll take it to court." And then she went in the end to the European Court of Human Rights. But they said, "Well, what you did was not performing or acting on your freedom of speech. It was inciting hate." And so she got fined, and she was fined again. So we have now, and it was what they call a key judgment. And in Europe, when European Court of Human Rights say it's a key judgment, it means that all member states, in this case in the EU, have to apply this way of thinking when it comes, for example, to demonstrations or the explanation of freedom of expression. So when member states, like for example Sweden, said, "Well, we don't know how to deal with it, and we have to look at our law, etc." That's BS, so to say. Why? Because we already have this case, and this case is ES, and that's the person in Austria versus Austria. And in this case, the European Court of Human Rights, they were very explicit. They said, "Well, all this, you cannot do that, because you have," what they said was their key explanation. They said, "You have to make sure there is religious peace." And then people start asking, "Okay, what is religious peace?" They said, "Well, you have to have religious peace, and it means that there have to be a peaceful coexistence between religious groups and non-religious groups." And
Or when
of course,
the Swedish and governments have been debating whether or not they can introduce a law to ban Quran burnings, you're saying this is the way to do it.
yeah, it's not even necessary to develop or write a new law, because they only have to apply ES versus Austria. in 2009, and it was already very clear you cannot burn objects of religious matter, in this case the Quran, and it was very explicit. So there is already a very clear explanation on what we can do and what we cannot do. So they only have to apply.
And why do you think they're not? What are their political calculations?
Well, I think in Sweden, of course, the far right won. And you have the SD, that's the Sweden Democrats, that's like the Freedom Party of Sweden. And they are supporting the minority government in Sweden right now. So if they say, okay, let's ban this burning of the Quran, then the SD will probably say, well, you can do that, but we will not support you anymore. And then they have a big problem because they will have new elections.
Do people understand that this is not about freedom, that it's about politics and harming a group for the sake of another group?
Well, in the end, I think it's showing the moral decay of the West, very sadly. Because normally, when you talk to older people who are not politically orientated, they just say, "Why would you burn things? Why would you say horrible things about the religion of other people?" It's just common sense. It's just something you don't do if you are raised in a good way. If you think it's normal to behave in a way that everybody can coexist in a peaceful and nice way, and that's something we are lacking here more and more every day. And I think that's a very worrisome situation.
I've seen in the news there's a Swedish Muslim group going out during the Quran burnings, handing out chocolates and flowers, I think, to the onlookers. Do you think this is the best response? You said earlier about these things are like political traps. They're sort of baiting Muslims to become angry so that they can say, look, you guys are violent. Uh, are you able to sort of just talk a little bit about that? Is that a good idea? Is that what we should all be doing?
Well, in the end, I think that is as one of the answers. I think the other answer is that we have to take people to court, because it's not that we say you cannot have your freedom of expression. You can criticize Islam as much as you want. There are whole books in the Middle East written from ages ago about why Islam is not the truth, why Christianity is not the truth, why Judaism is not the truth. And then you have people that explained why we as Muslims believe it is the truth. And there are there are a lot of arguments in favor of Islam, I think. But you can have your freedom of expression. You can criticize, but just do it in a respectful, normal way. You don't have to trash things, burn things. So I think one step is take those people to court, because, again, we have this case of ES versus Austria, and it's not allowed to do in the European member states. All parties, when it comes to European Convention on Human Rights, say it's not allowed, so they are not allowed to do it. So I think apply. And at the same time, on a more personal level, I think it's a good idea. Just, for example, give flowers, chocolate to the people who really don't understand, or explain why you think it's a harsh thing in a very good manner. And when we look at the Quran, for example, I think it's Surah 16, 125. And we have to call out to the way of our Lord with the best way in the best way we can. So let's do that. So we can take this as an opportunity as well to explain people why we, of course, believe Islam is the truth, and share this beautiful message.
If it was taken to court and the Sweden is a signatory, it would be tried in the European Commission for Human Rights, I'm guessing, on the case of you are inciting to hatred. Is that the path that you're saying would be the best way?
Yeah, in this case of ES versus Austria, in a judgment in ES, it was shown how the right of freedom of expression must be balanced against the right of others to have their religious feelings protected. And the case in this case was concerned as like an Austrian politician, and the European court said, okay, of course you can have your freedom of expression, but as long as you incite hatred or religious intolerance, it's prohibited. So you cannot do that. So when you take organizations or individuals to court, it is indeed on things like inciting hatred and religious intolerance, because you have to maintain religious peace in the European Union as long as you are a party in the European Convention on Human Rights.
I'm wondering, this should be my last question because we're going over time, but I'm wondering, you said earlier that people are secularized and they don't necessarily understand what's the big deal about burning a book with pages. Would it be hard to prove that this is actually inciting religious hatred?
No, because we already have a case like that here, and the European Court was very clear. So the only thing is, of course, it depends a little bit on the context, but in general, it's very clear. If you trash a book, burn a book, or something else, and it is about the Quran in this case, but the same goes for the Torah or the Bible. So if other organizations or Christian organizations say, well, why only the Muslims? It's not only the Muslims, all religious groups. It's prohibited to do. So and whether the court in a specific member state will say, okay, this specific case is proven. Of course, that depends a little bit on the situation, but in general, it's not allowed. So I think it shouldn't be too hard. But the only thing is that there is a political reality as well. Like I told you earlier, in Sweden, for example, the SD is supporting this minority government, a right-wing government, by the way, that just won the election. So that's why they think it's very hard, but it isn't.
Well, we're out of time, but thank you very much for your insights. Chocolate and quartz. Thank you for joining us. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for watching. If you like what we do, please share, like, and subscribe. Stay safe and God bless.